The security camera footage showed my wife laughing while my 11-year-old twins stood shivering in a thunderstorm, locked outside a mansion that wasn't ours. That's when I knew my retirement from MI6 was officially over. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Graham Knox, and 3 months ago, I thought the most dangerous thing in my life was Isabella's mother criticizing my career choices at dinner parties. Turns out, I was catastrophically wrong about everything. "Graham, you're being paranoid again," Isabella said, not looking up from her phone as I rewound the footage for the third time. "Julian was just showing the kids the garden. They love playing outside." Julian Everett, 42 years old, tech entrepreneur worth about £8 million, and my wife's newest interior design client. Also, apparently, the kind of man who thinks it's hilarious to lock children outside during storms while their mother records it for posterity. Playing outside in lightning? I kept my voice level. 20 years of intelligence work teaches you to control your reactions. "Emily was crying, Isabella. I can see her face clearly." Isabella finally looked up, her green eyes flashing with that particular brand of irritation she reserved for when I questioned her judgment. "You're seeing things that aren't there. Maybe if you spent less time in that garage tinkering with your computers and more time actually engaging with our family." "I found this USB drive in your purse." I held up the small device labeled Home Cam, Private, in Julian's pretentious handwriting. "Care to explain why you're bringing home surveillance footage of our children being terrorized?" The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. Isabella had always been good at that, recovering from uncomfortable truths with practiced deflection. "Julian asked me to review the security system for his home office renovation. The kids happened to be there during filming. You're making this into something it's not." I studied my wife's face, cataloging the micro-expressions I'd been trained to read in hostile interrogations, the slight tightening around her eyes when she mentioned Julian's name, the way her left hand unconsciously touched her neck, a tell she'd had since we met 15 years ago, always appearing when she was lying about something significant. "Right," I said. "And the reason you're giggling like a schoolgirl while Emily pounds on the glass door is what, exactly? Professional interior design enthusiasm?" Isabella stood up abruptly, smoothing down her expensive dress, another recent purchase I'd noticed but hadn't questioned. "I don't have to justify every aspect of my work to you, Graham. Just because you chose to waste your skills playing suburban dad doesn't mean the rest of us stopped having ambitions." She swept out of the room with the dramatic flair she'd perfected during her brief stint in community theater, leaving me alone with the footage that had just redefined my understanding of my marriage. I replayed the video one more time, focusing on details my trained eye had initially missed. The timestamp showed it was recorded 3 days ago, the same day Isabella claimed to be working late on fabric samples. Julian's body language as he guided my children outside, the casual cruelty in his smile as he turned the lock. And Isabella, my wife of 15 years, mother of my children, recording it all while laughing. The house felt different now, like a crime scene I was seeing with fresh eyes. Isabella's recent changes made sense in this new context. The designer clothes, the late nights, the way she'd started talking about expanding her client base and networking with successful people. The subtle digs about my wasted potential and how I was hiding from the real world in our quiet suburban neighborhood. My phone buzzed with a text from Pete, my best friend and former police detective, who'd been my drinking companion since we both retired to this sleepy corner of England. "Pub quiz tonight. Need your useless spy knowledge to win the history round." I looked around our living room, Isabella's carefully curated showcase of middle-class aspiration, and made a decision that would have consequences I couldn't yet imagine. I texted back, "Can't make it. Got some research to do." Pete's response was immediate. "Research? That sounds ominous. Everything all right?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing, "Just looking into some home security issues. Nothing dramatic." But as I headed down to my garage workshop, where I kept the computer equipment that Isabella thought was just a harmless hobby, I knew I was lying to both Pete and myself. This was going to be very dramatic indeed. The garage had been my sanctuary since we moved to this house 5 years ago. Isabella called it my man cave, with the kind of dismissive affection that made it clear she considered my technical skills an amusing anachronism. What she didn't know was that my tinkering included maintaining access to several databases that weren't exactly available to the general public. I booted up my main system and inserted Julian's USB drive, running it through a security scan before opening the files. What I found made my stomach turn. Dozens of videos, spanning the last 2 months, my children being used as props in what appeared to be an ongoing game of psychological manipulation. Julian would create scenarios, sudden loud noises, unexpected darkness, doors that wouldn't open, and film their reactions, while Isabella provided commentary like some demented nature documentary narrator. "Look at Emily's face," Isabella's voice came through my speakers, tinged with an excitement I'd never heard before. "She really thinks something terrible is going to happen." In the video, my daughter's 11-year-old face showed genuine terror as Julian's security system triggered false alarms throughout his mansion. Theo, my son, was trying to comfort his sister while also fighting his own obvious fear. I sat back in my chair, processing what I was seeing. This wasn't just an affair, though it was obviously that too. This was systematic cruelty being practiced on my children for entertainment, with my wife as an enthusiastic participant. The MI6 training I thought I'd left behind came flooding back. Pattern recognition, threat assessment, operational planning. But this wasn't some international crisis requiring delicate diplomacy. This was personal, and the people I'd trusted most in the world had betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. I spent the next 3 hours going through every file on the drive, building a timeline of escalating incidents. The earliest videos showed relatively innocent interactions, Julian showing the twins his expensive cars, Isabella filming what looked like normal socializing. But the tone shifted quickly, becoming more calculated and cruel. By the time I heard Isabella's car in the driveway, I had a complete picture of what had been happening behind my back. I also had the beginning of a plan. Isabella came home at midnight, moving through the house with the careful quiet of someone trying not to wake anyone. I watched from my office window as she parked her car, noting that she didn't pull into the garage as usual, instead leaving it positioned for a quick departure. "Graham?" she called softly from the hallway. "Are you still awake?" I closed my laptop and walked out to meet her, studying her appearance with new eyes. Her makeup was fresh, reapplied recently. Her hair showed the telltale signs of being styled twice in one day. Most telling of all, she was wearing different jewelry than she'd had on when she left that morning. "Working late again?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Client dinner ran longer than expected." She didn't meet my eyes as she headed toward the stairs. "Julian's planning a major renovation of his West Wing, and we needed to go over the timeline." "Must be quite a timeline to discuss until midnight." Isabella paused on the third step, her hand tightening on the banister. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all, just commenting on your dedication to customer service." She turned to look at me then, and I saw something new in her expression. Not guilt, but calculation. Like she was trying to determine how much I knew, and what her best response would be. "Graham, are we going to have a problem? Because if you're going to start getting suspicious and jealous every time I work with a successful client—" "I'm not jealous, Isabella. I'm concerned about our children's welfare." "The children are fine. They love Julian. He's been incredibly generous with them, much more patient than—" She stopped herself, but we both knew how that sentence was going to end. "Much more patient than their father?" Isabella sighed, the sound carrying 15 years of accumulated disappointment. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. We stood there in the hallway, the silence stretching between us like a chasm that had been widening for months without either of us acknowledging it. Finally, Isabella continued up the stairs. I'm tired, Graham. Can we not do this tonight? I waited until I heard our bedroom door close before returning to my office. The house felt different now, not like a home, but like a surveillance post where I was monitoring hostile activity. I opened my laptop and continued my research, this time focusing on Julian Everett himself. What I found painted a picture of a man who'd built his fortune on other people's ideas and had a pattern of discarding business partners once they'd outlived their usefulness. More interesting were the social media traces I could access through channels that would have made Isabella very uncomfortable if she'd known about them. Julian's digital footprint showed a man obsessed with control and documentation. He recorded everything: business meetings, social interactions, even casual conversations with friends. The realization hit me like a physical blow. If Julian was documenting his psychological games with my children, he was almost certainly recording his relationship with my wife as well. I spent the next 2 hours crafting a very specific type of search, using skills I'd developed during my years tracking international criminals. By dawn, I had what I was looking for: access to Julian's personal cloud storage, where he kept files he thought were completely secure. What I found there made the footage of my children look like a warm-up act. Hours of video showing Isabella in Julian's bedroom, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was listening to their conversations afterward, when they would review footage of the twins and plan new scenarios for testing their reactions. Emily's more resilient than Theo. Isabella's voice came through my headphones, clinical and detached. It takes more to really get to her. We should try something with the dogs next time, Julian replied. Children that age are very attached to animals. The emotional response should be quite pronounced. I had to stop the playback and step outside for air. The morning sun was just coming up over our neighborhood, rows of neat houses where normal families were starting their normal days, completely unaware that one of their neighbors had just discovered his wife was a monster. My phone rang. Pete. You sound like hell, he said without preamble. What's going on? Can't talk about it over the phone. Meet me at the pub when they open? Graham, you're scaring me. This isn't like you. He was right. The old Graham, suburban dad Graham, would have confronted Isabella directly, probably would have ended up in marriage counseling trying to work through whatever was happening. But that Graham had passed away somewhere around 3 a.m. while watching his wife plan psychological torture scenarios for their children. Just meet me at the pub, Pete. I need advice from someone who understands how evidence works. There was a long pause. Evidence? Jesus, Graham, what have you found? More than I wanted to, less than I need. After Pete hung up, I sat in my garden and tried to process what I was going to do next. The MI6 training was clear: gather intelligence, assess threats, neutralize problems with minimal collateral damage. But this wasn't some foreign operative threatening national security. This was my wife, the mother of my children, who had apparently decided that our family was an acceptable casualty in her pursuit of whatever Julian Everett was offering her. I heard movement in the house, Isabella getting ready for another day of pretending to be a loving mother and faithful wife. The twins would be up soon, getting ready for school, completely unaware that their mother had been documenting their fear for entertainment. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront Isabella. I wasn't going to have a dramatic showdown with Julian. I was going to treat this like any other intelligence operation, methodical, thorough, and absolutely devastating in its execution. But first, I needed to make sure my children were safe. The Lamb and Flag opened at 11, and Pete was already waiting with 2 pints when I arrived. He took one look at my face and pushed the beer across the table without saying a word. How bad is it? He asked, after I'd taken a long drink. Remember that case you worked about 5 years ago? The couple who were running the unlicensed daycare, filming the children for those online perverts? Pete's expression darkened. Please tell me you're not going where I think you're going. Not sexual, but systematic psychological abuse, filmed for entertainment. My wife is participating. My children are the subjects. I watched Pete process this information. 25 years as a detective had given him the same ability I had, to compartmentalize horror and focus on facts. Evidence? I pulled out a tablet and showed him one of the milder videos, Julian startling the twins with sudden loud noises, while Isabella filmed their reactions and provided commentary. Pete watched in silence, his jaw tightening with each passing second. When it finished, he set the tablet down carefully, like it was made of explosives. Right. What do you need? Legal advice. If I submit this to the authorities, what happens? Depends on how much you have and how clean the chain of custody is. Where did you get this? I explained about finding the USB drive, and Pete nodded slowly. That's good. Found in your own home, your wife's possession, your children being abused. Any decent prosecutor would take this seriously. But Graham, he leaned forward. How much more is there? Hours, weeks of footage, and it escalates. Christ. Pete finished his beer in one long swallow. What about the husband? Julian, was it? Julian Everett. Tech money. Thinks he's untouchable. Lives in that new development outside town, the one with the private security. I know the place. Bunch of wankers who think money makes them immune to consequences. Pete's expression shifted into what I recognized as his professional mode. What's your play? That was the question I'd been wrestling with since dawn. The obvious answer was to gather all the evidence and turn it over to the police. Let the system handle it, trust in justice, take the high road. But 20 years in intelligence work had taught me that the system doesn't always work, especially when you're dealing with wealthy people who have resources and connections. Julian could afford lawyers who would make this process drag on for years, while my children continued to be traumatized. I'm going to handle it myself, I said. Pete stared at me. Graham, no. Whatever you're thinking, don't. You're not that person anymore. What person? The one who solves problems by making them disappear. You're a suburban dad now. You drive a Volvo and worry about school fees. Don't throw that away. I appreciated what Pete was trying to do, but he didn't understand. I had been that suburban dad, right up until I watched my wife laugh while my children suffered. That version of me was gone, and what was left was someone Julian Everett had never encountered before. I'm not going to hurt anyone, I said. But I'm not going to sit back and let this continue while lawyers argue about jurisdiction and evidence admissibility. Pete sighed. What do you need from me? Information, Julian's background, his business associates, anything that might give me leverage. And I hesitated. If things go badly, I need someone who can make sure the twins are taken care of. Things won't go badly because you're not going to do anything stupid. Pete's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades talking people down from bad decisions. Promise me, Graham, no cowboy shit. I promised, but we both knew I was lying. That afternoon, I put my plan into motion. First step, reconnaissance. Julian's house was in an exclusive development called Millbrook Heights, where every property sat on at least 5 acres, and the cheapest house cost more than most people made in a decade. The security was impressive but not impenetrable. Cameras at the gates, roving patrols, motion sensors along the perimeter. What the security system wasn't designed for was someone with my particular skill set. I spent 3 hours mapping the blind spots, timing the patrol routes, and identifying the weak points in their electronic surveillance. By sunset, I had what I needed, a way in and out without being detected. The second step was more delicate, accessing Julian's home network. Every rich person's house is essentially a computer these days, smart locks, automated climate control, integrated entertainment systems, all connected to a central network that's supposed to be secure but usually isn't. Julian's setup was more sophisticated than most, but it had the same fundamental weakness. It was designed for convenience, not security. I waited until 2 a.m., then drove to within range of his house and began my electronic assault. It took 45 minutes to crack his Wi-Fi password, his dog's name, plus his birth year, not exactly NSA-level security, and another hour to map his internal network. What I found was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Julian wasn't just recording his interactions with my family, he was documenting everything. Business meetings where he discussed bribing planning officials, conversations with his accountant about tax evasion schemes, video calls with associates that would have interested several law enforcement agencies. But the files that made me furious were in a folder labeled Family Project. Dozens of videos of my children, organized by date and tagged with clinical observations about their emotional responses. Spreadsheets tracking which scenarios produced the strongest fear reactions. And worst of all, a planning document outlining future experiments that would have been at home in a psychological torture manual. The final entry, dated just 2 days ago, made me physically sick. Subject Emily showing increased resistance to standard fear stimuli. Recommend escalation to physical discomfort scenarios. Subject Theo remains highly responsive to separation anxiety triggers. I sat in my car, staring at the screen, feeling something cold and dangerous settle in my chest. These weren't just cruel games. This was systematic abuse with a research methodology behind it. Julian was treating my children like laboratory animals, and Isabella was helping him do it. That's when I stopped thinking like a concerned father and started thinking like an intelligence operative with a target to neutralize. I spent the rest of the night downloading everything from Julian's servers, building a comprehensive picture of his activities and associates. By dawn, I had enough evidence to destroy him in a dozen different ways. The question was, which method would be most satisfying? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my garage organizing terabytes of data into carefully categorized files: financial crimes, tax evasion, planning violations, and the crown jewel, systematic child abuse with my wife as a willing accomplice. The smart play would have been to package everything up and send it to the authorities anonymously. Let the system grind Julian and Isabella into dust while I maintained plausible deniability. But I'd spent too many years watching criminals escape consequences through legal technicalities and expensive lawyers. This required a more personal touch. At 7 a.m., I heard Isabella moving around upstairs, getting ready for another day of pretending to be a loving mother. I made coffee and waited for her in the kitchen, studying her face as she came downstairs. "You're up early," she said, avoiding eye contact as she grabbed her purse. "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about our conversation last night." Isabella paused at the refrigerator, her back to me. "What about it?" "You said the children love Julian, that he's patient with them." "He is. More patient than—" She caught herself again. "More patient than me." "You can say it, Isabella. We both know that's what you think." She turned around then, and I saw something new in her expression. Not guilt or defensiveness, but a kind of cold calculation that made her look like a stranger. "Maybe I do think that. Maybe I think our children deserve better than a father who's given up on life, who spends his time hiding in a garage playing with computers instead of engaging with his family." "Is that what Julian tells you?" "Julian doesn't have to tell me anything. I can see it for myself. You've been sleepwalking through our marriage for years, Graham. At least Julian appreciates what I have to offer." There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. Not just about the affair, but about how she really saw me, saw our family, saw the life we'd built together. "And what do you have to offer, Julian, that's worth involving our children in your relationship?" Isabella's face went white. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know about the videos, Isabella, all of them." For a moment she looked genuinely shocked. Then her expression shifted into something harder, more defiant. "You've been spying on me. I've been protecting our children, something you seem to have forgotten how to do. Those videos are nothing. Julian likes to document his interactions with people. It's just his way of what? Cataloging their fear responses? Planning psychological torture scenarios?" Isabella stared at me, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how much I knew and what her best strategy was. "You don't understand what you're looking at," she said finally. "Julian is conducting research into child psychology. It's important work that could help what? Traumatize children more efficiently? Help understand how children process stress and develop resilience. The twins aren't being harmed. They're participating in groundbreaking research that—" I held up my hand to stop her. "Isabella, listen to yourself. You're talking about our children like they're laboratory animals. I'm talking about them like they're capable of contributing to something meaningful instead of just existing in suburban mediocrity." The contempt in her voice was breathtaking. This wasn't the woman I'd married, or maybe it was, and I'd just been too blind to see it. "Pack a bag," I said quietly. "What?" "Pack a bag and leave. Today. Don't come back." Isabella laughed. Actually laughed, and the sound was exactly like her laughter on Julian's videos. "You can't throw me out of my own house, Graham. I have rights. We're married. Half of everything here is mine." "Not anymore." I pulled out my tablet and showed her a document I'd prepared during my sleepless night. A detailed report of her activities, complete with video evidence and financial records showing unexplained deposits into her personal account. "What is this?" "Your insurance claim. Turns out Julian's been paying you for access to the children. That makes you an employee in his research project, not a victim of manipulation. It also makes you complicit in systematic child abuse." Isabella grabbed the tablet and scrolled through the document, her face growing paler with each page. "You can't prove any of this." "I can prove all of it. Bank records, video evidence, digital communications, and, in about an hour, copies of everything will be in the hands of Detective Inspector Sarah Chen at the county police, along with a formal complaint filed by a concerned father." "You're bluffing." I pulled out my phone and showed her the sent email confirmation. "I don't bluff anymore, Isabella. That's something you might have remembered before you decided to experiment on our children." She stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, she looked genuinely frightened. "Graham, please, we can work this out. I made some mistakes, but we can fix this. The children don't have to know anything about—" "The children already know, Isabella. They've been living with the trauma you and Julian created. The only question now is whether you leave voluntarily or wait for the police to escort you out." Isabella set the tablet down carefully, her hands shaking slightly. "If I leave, what happens to my rights? To my access to the children?" "That depends on how cooperative you are with the investigation and how much additional evidence I decide to share with the authorities." She understood the threat. I had enough material to destroy not just her parental rights, but her freedom. Julian's files contained evidence of financial crimes that Isabella had been party to, including money laundering through her interior design business. "I need time to think." "You have until the children get home from school. After that, I don't want them to see you until this is resolved." Isabella nodded slowly, then walked toward the stairs. At the bottom step, she turned back. "You know this won't end the way you think it will. Julian has resources, connections. He won't just disappear because you've gathered some evidence." "I'm counting on that," I said. After she went upstairs, I sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee and waiting for my phone to ring. It took exactly 47 minutes. "Mr. Knox? This is Detective Inspector Chen. I've received some very disturbing materials from you this morning. I'd like to discuss them in person as soon as possible." "Of course. Should I come to the station?" "Actually, I'd prefer to meet at your home. I'll need to see the location where you discovered the initial evidence, and I may need to speak with your children. The children are at school until 3:30. That's fine. I'll be there in an hour with a colleague from our digital crimes unit. Mr. Knox, I have to ask, are you and your family in any immediate danger? I looked out the window at our quiet suburban street, where the most dangerous thing that usually happened was Mrs. Patterson walking her aggressive terrier. Not anymore, I said. Detective Inspector Chen arrived with a colleague and a warrant to search Julian's property. What they found there exceeded even my expectations. Julian's research wasn't limited to my children. His files contained videos of dozens of other families, all clients of Isabella's interior design business. She'd been providing him with access to homes and children for over 2 years, using her professional relationships as cover for his psychological experiments. But Julian wasn't going down without a fight. Mr. Knox, Detective Chen called me at 6 p.m. I need to inform you that Mr. Everett has filed a counter-complaint alleging that you illegally accessed his computer systems and are attempting to frame him for crimes he didn't commit. That's interesting. What evidence is he providing to support that theory? He claims you have advanced technical skills from your previous career and that you fabricated the video evidence using digital manipulation techniques. I had to admire Julian's strategy. Attack the credibility of the evidence by claiming it was manufactured by someone with the skills to do so. If he could cast doubt on the authenticity of the videos, he might be able to escape prosecution. Detective, I assume your digital crimes unit is capable of determining whether video evidence has been manipulated? They are, but Mr. Everett has hired a very expensive legal team, and they're claiming that any analysis we conduct could be compromised by the fact that you allegedly accessed his systems illegally. This was exactly the kind of legal maneuvering I'd expected. Julian was using his resources to turn the investigation into a battle over technical evidence, rather than focusing on the simple fact that he'd been torturing children. What do you need from me? Complete cooperation with our technical analysis, and a detailed statement about how you obtained the evidence. I have to warn you, Mr. Knox, if we determine that you did access Mr. Everett's systems illegally, you could face criminal charges yourself. After Chen hung up, I sat in my garage considering my options. Julian was trying to make this a legal chess match, confident that his money and lawyers would eventually wear down the system. He was probably right, which meant it was time to stop playing by the system's rules. That night, I drove to Millbrook Heights and parked outside Julian's development. The police had finished their search, but there were still security guards at the gate and patrol cars making regular rounds. Julian was taking no chances. I waited until 2 a.m., then made my move. Getting past the security was easier than it should have been. Rich people's security systems are designed to keep out opportunistic criminals, not someone with professional training in infiltration. I was inside Julian's house within 15 minutes, moving through rooms I'd studied extensively on his own security cameras. Julian was asleep in his master bedroom, probably dreaming about how his lawyers were going to destroy the case against him. I stood in his doorway for a long moment, thinking about how easy it would be to end this permanently. But that wasn't who I was anymore. Or at least, it wasn't who I wanted to be. Instead, I went to his home office and began the final phase of my operation. Julian's computer system was more than just a repository of evidence. It was the control center for his entire house. Smart locks, climate control, security cameras, even the swimming pool heating system, all connected to a central network that he could manage from his phone. It took me 3 hours to reprogram everything. When Julian woke up the next morning, nothing in his house worked properly. The smart locks had changed their access codes. The climate control was stuck on maximum heat. The security system was playing children's nursery rhymes at full volume. And every screen in the house was displaying a slideshow of his most incriminating videos, the ones showing him terrorizing my children while Isabella laughed. But that was just the warm-up act. The real show began when Julian tried to call his security company and discovered that his phone was forwarding all calls to a recording I'd made the night before, his own voice, taken from one of his videos saying, "I enjoy watching children suffer. It makes me feel powerful." By noon, Julian's lawyers were at his house trying to figure out what was happening. By evening, videos of Julian's smart house malfunction were circulating on social media, shared by neighbors who'd been recording the chaos. But I wasn't finished. At exactly midnight, I triggered the final phase of my plan. Every house in Millbrook Heights lost power simultaneously, except for Julian's, which remained brightly lit with every window displaying the slideshow of incriminating videos. The effect was spectacular. Julian's house stood out like a beacon in the darkness, broadcasting his crimes to anyone who cared to look. And in a development full of wealthy people with smartphones and social media accounts, plenty of people were looking. Within hours, the videos were everywhere. Local news picked up the story. National media followed. Julian Everett, the tech entrepreneur who thought he was untouchable, became the most hated man in England overnight. The legal case became irrelevant. Julian's business partners abandoned him. His board of directors voted him out of his own company. His social circle evaporated as everyone scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later, when Detective Chen called to tell me that Julian had been found in his office, surrounded by printed copies of the social media posts about him, crying like one of the children he'd tormented. "He's agreed to plead guilty to all charges," Chen said. "In exchange, he's asking for protective custody. Apparently, he's received some very credible threats from parents who saw the videos." "And Isabella?" "She's cooperating fully with our investigation. Her testimony about the other families Julian targeted will be crucial for building cases to protect those children as well." I hung up and walked outside to where Emily and Theo were playing in our garden, looking happier and more relaxed than they had in months. They didn't know all the details of what had happened, just that they wouldn't be visiting Julian anymore and that their mother had gone away for a while to get better. Pete joined me on the porch, carrying 2 beers and wearing the expression of someone who'd watched his friend do something simultaneously brilliant and terrifying. "So what happens now?" he asked. I looked at my children, at the quiet suburban street where normal families were living normal lives, at the house that felt like a home again for the first time in months. "Now we go back to being boring," I said. 6 months later, I was standing in Heathrow Airport, watching planes take off, while Emily and Theo argued about whether we should order fish and chips or pizza for our last meal in England. The legal proceedings had concluded faster than anyone expected. Julian received 8 years for child abuse, with additional sentences running concurrently for his financial crimes. Isabella received 2 years suspended sentence in exchange for her cooperation, but lost all parental rights. She'd moved to Spain with what remained of her savings, sending the children birthday cards they never opened. The house had sold within a week of going on the market. Apparently, our quiet suburban street was exactly what some young family was looking for. The proceeds, combined with my pension and some investments I'd made over the years, were enough to start over anywhere we wanted. The children had voted for Canada. "It's like England, but with better weather and less drama," Emily had explained with the kind of logic that made me proud of how resilient they'd proven to be. "Dad," Theo said, tugging on my sleeve. "Are you sure we're doing the right thing?" It was a fair question. We were leaving behind everything familiar. Pete, the few neighbors who'd been genuinely supportive, the school where the twins had finally started feeling safe again. "What do you think?" I asked him. "I think," Emily said, joining the conversation with the authority of someone who'd survived psychological torture and come out stronger, "that sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better." My 11-year-old daughter had just summarized the philosophy that had guided me through the darkest period of my life. I couldn't have been more proud. "Besides," Theo added, "you promised we could get a dog when we get to Toronto." That was true. After months of being afraid of everything, My children had decided they wanted something to protect, something that would depend on them for safety and love. It seemed like a healthy impulse. Our flight was called, and we gathered our carry-on bags. Everything else had been shipped ahead to the apartment I'd rented sight unseen in a Toronto suburb that looked, from the online photos, remarkably similar to the neighborhood we were leaving. As we walked toward the gate, my phone buzzed with a text from Pete. Saw the news about Julian, attempted suicide in prison, thought you should know. I showed the message to Emily, who read it without expression. Do you feel bad for him? She asked. No, I said. Do you? She considered this seriously, the way she approached all important questions. I feel bad that he was the kind of person who hurt children, but I don't feel bad that he's suffering now. That's a very mature way to look at it. I learned from watching you, Dad. You didn't hurt him because you enjoyed it. You hurt him because it was necessary. We boarded the plane and found our seats, 3 across in economy, because I'd decided that the twins should learn that money wasn't something to take for granted, even when we had enough of it. As the plane taxied toward the runway, I thought about the report I'd written during those long nights in my garage, the one that had started as evidence gathering and ended as something like a confession. I'd titled it Shadow Report, When the Lights Go Out, and it contained everything. Not just Julian's crimes and Isabella's betrayal, but my own transformation from suburban dad back into someone capable of systematic revenge. I'd considered publishing it, turning our story into a cautionary tale about trust and betrayal and the lengths a parent will go to protect their children. But in the end, I'd decided that some stories were better left untold, at least until enough time had passed to give them proper perspective. The plane lifted off, and England fell away below us. Emily had her face pressed to the window, watching the landscape shrink into a patchwork of fields and roads and houses where other families were living their lives, hopefully without the kind of drama that had consumed ours. Dad, Theo said, in Canada, can we just be normal? What's normal? I asked. You know, school and friends and arguing about bedtime and getting in trouble for not cleaning our rooms. Regular family stuff. I looked at my children, these 2 remarkable people who'd survived psychological torture and the collapse of their family with more grace than most adults could manage, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months, optimism about the future. I think we can manage normal, I said. The plane climbed higher, carrying us toward a new country and a new life. Behind us, Julian Everett was learning what it felt like to be powerless and afraid. Isabella was discovering that running away from consequences doesn't make them disappear. And somewhere in England, Pete was probably telling the story of his friend who'd retired from espionage only to find himself in the most personal mission of his life. But ahead of us was Toronto, where nobody knew our story and we could be whoever we decided to be. A single father and his 2 children, starting over with nothing but each other and the hard-won understanding that family isn't defined by biology or paperwork. It's about the people you'd do anything to protect. As we reached cruising altitude, Emily fell asleep against my shoulder, and Theo pulled out a book about Canadian wildlife. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what normal would look like for us. Weekend hockey games, maybe. Parent-teacher conferences where the biggest concern was math grades instead of psychological trauma. Birthday parties and sleepovers and all the wonderfully mundane experiences that make up a childhood. It sounded perfect. 6 hours later, we landed in Toronto to find snow falling gently outside the terminal windows. The children pressed their faces to the glass, enchanted by their first real winter weather, while I collected our luggage and tried to remember how to be excited about new beginnings, instead of constantly watching for threats. It's beautiful, Emily said, and she was right. The snow made everything look clean and fresh, like the world had been reset while we were in the air. We took a taxi to our new neighborhood, driving through streets lined with houses that looked remarkably similar to the ones we'd left behind. But these houses held different families, different stories, different possibilities. Our apartment was on the second floor of a converted Victorian house, with big windows and hardwood floors, and enough space for the twins to have their own rooms for the first time in their lives. The previous tenant had left behind a few pieces of furniture and a note welcoming us to Canada. "It feels like home already," Theo said, bouncing on the couch that would be ours for the next year while we figured out what came next. That night, after we'd ordered pizza and unpacked the essentials and called Pete to let him know we'd arrived safely, I tucked the children into their new beds and sat in the living room looking out at the snow-covered street. My phone buzzed with one final message from Detective Chen. "Thought you'd want to know. We've identified 17 other families Julian was targeting. Your evidence helped us protect a lot of children. Thank you." I deleted the message and turned off the phone. That chapter of our lives was over, and I had no intention of looking back. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering our new world in pristine white. Tomorrow, the children would start school, and I would begin the process of building a life that had nothing to do with intelligence work, or revenge, or the kind of people who thought children were acceptable casualties in their personal dramas. Tomorrow, we would begin learning how to be normal. But tonight, I sat in the darkness of our new home and allowed myself one moment of satisfaction. Julian Everett had thought he was untouchable, protected by wealth and connections and the assumption that ordinary people couldn't fight back against someone with his resources. He'd been catastrophically wrong about that, and about me. The lights in the houses across the street began going out one by one as our new neighbors settled in for the night. Soon, our block was dark except for the street lights casting pools of yellow light on the falling snow. I thought about Julian, alone in his prison cell, probably lying awake wondering how his perfect plan had gone so wrong. I thought about Isabella, somewhere in Spain, trying to convince herself that she'd been the victim in our story. And I thought about all the other children who were sleeping safely tonight because sometimes, when the system fails, ordinary people have to take extraordinary measures. Then I went to check on Emily and Theo one last time, kissed them goodnight, and went to bed in our new home, in our new country, ready to begin our new life. The revenge was complete. The mission was over. Now it was time to learn how to be a family again.